everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar tonight. We're letting everyone in join from the waiting room, and then we'll get started in just a few seconds. If we can go to the next slide. So as you know, we have a community webinar every month to talk about updates on expanded access or EAPs. My name is Sabrina Paganoni. I am a physician investigator at the HEALEY Center for ALS at Mass General Hospital. And today I'm here with Catherine Small and Alison Bullitt, who are our patient engagement team. And we're really, really excited that we are here for this monthly update. There's a lot happening in EAPs, and certainly we want to bring news to the entire community. So if we can go to the next slide. I just want to say that this webinar is not the only opportunity to learn about EAPs. Obviously, first of all, we record our webinars as well as our slides are available on our website. And if you take a picture with your camera for using that QR code that you see on the slide or use the link below, you can see a link to our EAP web pages and resources. They are linked to our overall website from the HEALEY Center. And we worked hard with a great group of patient advisors who helped us revamp the website and add a lot of nice information, frequently asked questions and ideas, so that if you, if there's a lot of information here on this webinar, you want to go back and want to see the slides, want to look again at the information or get more information, everything is available for everyone on our website. So also feel free to share with people you know who may have questions about expanded access. And thank you, Catherine, for posting it in the chat. So everyone can go directly there if you use the chat. And there's a newsletter that our communication specialists issues every few months. And so we also have periodic updates for the entire community. We know that it's not easy to find information about EAPs and that it may be hard to get access to the latest. And that's why we have built this webpage. That's why we have this monthly series. So if you hear from anyone that they're having difficulties accessing news about EAPs or they want to know the status of the different programs, please don't hesitate to connect them with us. We're going to have some email and phone number at the end that you can share. And again, the slides are available on the website, so you can easily share them with anyone who may have questions about expanded access. Next slide. So we are also sharing our experience with the academic community. These papers are available open access. We published 4 so far, and what you see on the screen highlighted is the most recent one. The reason we are also sharing sort of the scientific research aspects of expanded access is because we want to share the utility of this approach, the science, the learnings that we have from EAPs, and we want to share them with everyone because other groups, other investigators, whether in the US or elsewhere, they may be interested in opening additional EAPs. And so we want to share our experience. So again, everything is available to read. And again, the link is on the slides or in the chat. Next slide. So I want to provide a super brief summary of the EAP landscape over the last few years. Well, in 2018, there was essentially no EAP in the US for ALS. EAPs were available for other disease areas, cancer, HIV, they had been around for a while, but really they were not available for ALS. And then at that time, around 2018, 2019, because of some of our patients that we see at the HEALEY Center in Boston, they started asking us, can we leverage this mechanism, which is an FDA-regulated mechanism, to gain access to investigational products or experimental drugs. And so that's when the first experience with a single center, single individual EAP started at our center. And then we quickly realized that this was of interest to other people as well. And so in 2021, 2022, in parallel to a large randomized clinical trial that we are running called the HEALEY ALS platform trial, we decided to give this opportunity to other sites. We did a lot of fundraising, and actually many people in the community helped us with the fundraising and made something new possible, which was to have a small multi-center EAP program at 9 sites that were also participating in the HEALEY ALS platform trial. And this was funded purely by generous donations from patients and groups, and we're very thankful to all of them. ALS contributed, individual donors contributed, because we wanted to make sure that this experience that we were having at our center as a single center could be available to others. And then something transformative happened. So at the very end of 2021, the Act for ALS was signed into law, and that brought EAPs to a whole new different scale. Basically, before, again, all the programs that I spoke about until literally early 2022, they were all funded by donations, and by necessity, they were limited in scope and scale. So it was only a few centers, again, started with 1 center initially, and then just a handful of centers. And then the EAPs that were funded by this mechanism, basically by donations from patients or patient support groups, they could only collect limited amount of information. And so they were very flexible and very kind of low cost, and very, again, just only focused on access. They were not focused on research. But then with the Act for ALS, that allowed Congress to set aside a significant amount of money of a completely different scale compared to the funding that we had before based on donations, to bring EAPs to the next level, to make them available at multiple sites, not just a handful of sites, to more people, and also, most importantly, to leverage them as research experiences, so that the participation in the EAPs would translate not only in participation of individual people and, kind of access to the drug, but also research findings that can benefit everyone, the entire community. So that's why the law was passed, to produce a set of EAPs that would primarily be focused on research while giving access to people living with ALS. And so the first round of grants was in 2022. And we got the first grant that was to fund an EAP of trials that happened at up to 25 sites, and that's now being completed. And then the second year, in 2023, we and others received a total of 3 grants to conduct EAPs of Pridopidine at 45 sites, RAPA 501 at 10 sites, and then CNM A-Weight, which is coordinated by Columbia Dr. Andrews, at 7 sites, plus a completely virtual site, which is wonderful. We never had that before. So between, these 4 grants that were funded in 2022, 2023, and then launched, in the subsequent months, this allowed EAPs to go from a small set of sites to a good group of sites. I mean, again, obviously not every single city, not every single center has them, but in terms of the growth and the scale, clearly much more available than before. And then more recently, in 2024, a new NIH-funded EAP was announced. That's the EAP of Ibudilast, that's coordinated by the Mayo Clinic and Dr. Oscar Sron from Florida. So that's the most recent one. And then obviously there are every year some awards are given out. And again, there is a competitive process to apply for these awards. So I just wanted to provide some kind of summary of how the entire field has grown from being non-existent to now being still somewhat limited in terms of reach and number of people, but with big research goals and the goal also of benefiting everyone in the community via research. Next slide. So let's review the ones that are open right now, and then talk about what options there are for people who may be on the call and may be interested in joining these studies. So the Pridopidine grant, it was funded at up to 45 sites with a target enrollment of 200 people living with ALS. Of note, by definition, EAPs only enroll people that do not qualify for clinical trials. And because they are somewhat of an extension of care, there has to be some sort of medical supervision or connection again to the site that administers the EAP. It's the same dose that was tested as part of a randomized clinical trial, because per the law, there has to be some clinical trial that's ongoing or planned in parallel to the EAP. So this was funded again with the second round of EAP grants. And if you can click one more time, we actually enrolled essentially, if you can click one more time, please, it's enrolled now almost to the other side. Yeah, click one more time. Thank you. So we have now enrolled essentially 200 people, whether they have already come in for screening or they are scheduled for screening over the next couple of weeks. So essentially, we have completed the enrollment or are very close to that. And are scheduled to do so soon. So that basically means that the entire EAP for 200 people was essentially enrolled in about 9 months from the start. So really fast enrollment rates. I know that there's been, some comments online about the fact that these EAPs started slowly. I will say that, and I just want to clarify that, again, we enrolled 200 people in 9 months, which obviously we wish we could do it even faster. But I would say that, again, for being one of the first EAPs in ALS, I think we enrolled efficiently, and now we hope to do even faster for the next few EAPs. We also had to build the infrastructure to make this possible because, again, it was not existent before. If we can go to the next EAP. The next one is actually one that I'm not personally involved with. It's an EAP of CNM weight, which is managed by Columbia University, and Dr. Andrews is the PI. She has graciously come here as a speaker, and I'm sure we can have her again because, again, she's the leader of this EAP. This EAP is enrolling at a few sites, including a virtual site, which is actually interesting. That's never been done before in terms of having a completely virtual site managed by Synaptic Cure to give access to people who are not near any centers that administer the EAP. And the target enrollment, I believe, is about 180 individuals. And again, they cannot qualify for clinical trials. So if you can click one more time, please. We'll see that based on the updates that we just received, we are about 180 participants, so meeting target enrollment between the people who are already actually enrolled and the people who are scheduled or planned to come in for screening. So again, this one also enrolled very, very rapidly in 2024. Next slide. So the RAPA EAP that we manage with Dr. Barry and Dr. Babu from MGH is a smaller EAP because the product that's given, it's very different. It's actually a cell-based product, meaning it's not only tablets or pills or kind of oral medications. It's actually a procedure. People who participate need to have their cells, Treg cells, basically collected, and then they have to be expanded in the lab, and then they are reinfused. So by definition, because it takes some time to plan for the collection, expansion, and then reinfusion according to a certain schedule, this EAP by design basically is enrolling a little bit slower because, again, there's a lot of complexity in doing this type of procedure. And so this is done for 40 people up to 10 sites. And in terms of the progress, if you can click one more time, it's 6 sites were activated and 15 participants are screened. So I think, again, the sites are now connecting to their patients. And if you have questions about whether there are available spots at the site next to you, we will share how to find that information later. Next slide. And then the next EAP I want to touch on is the Ibudilast EAP that was just announced basically a couple of months ago. It was just awarded. So the study is in startup, meaning that the Mayo Clinic in Florida is working with the company to open enrollment. It's not open for enrollment yet. It will be in a few weeks, and the target enrollment is 200 people. So again, if you have questions about this, you can ask your physician, and then they can inquire with the Mayo Clinic to see which sites will be available in 2025, and also, how to connect and get into the EAP. Next slide. And actually here, I know Dr. Andrews joined us, and thank you so much for sharing these slides. We really are a great summary of some of the key points about expanded access. As I said at the beginning, a key point here, and Jinsy, please let me know if you want, do you want to present these slides? Please go ahead, because they are from you. They're great.
Thank you. I just wanted to share a couple of key points, actually.
Yes.
About expanded access program. Doesn't matter who presents this, because we're all in it together, really. But I think one of the important points that I've been trying to share more broadly is that the expanded access programs, although in concept, expanded access is to provide access to investigational therapies, it is actually building and contributing to our scientific landscape and research and basic science understanding for ALS. And so the innovation that's being brought forward through these NIH-funded expanded access programs is really innovative trial design. So most of these programs, actually all of them, employ some flexibility in the study designs and study visits, with options for remote visits and feasibility for fully, it's like evaluating fully remote enrollment, especially through the CLEAN expanded access program that's funded through the NIH. It's also collecting digital outcome measures and longitudinal clinical data and biomarker samples that could be used and evaluated for future research and help us better understand ALS in the future, so that we can do studies that have more impact with better investigational products that we understand for targets. We can study all of the expanded access programs actually collect biofluid samples, and they all kind of funnel through this central repository that the NIH has identified and helped to maintain. And that will also be an open repository for researchers to access for future studies and basic science. And of course, in one of the programs, including the CLEAN EAP program, there's the testing and validation of potential virtual or synthetic controls, and using that application for historical controls as a comparator arm. But really, I think the other point that's kind of lost sometimes when we're talking about expanded access, historically, it's just been for access for investigational therapies, but these NIH-funded ones do have research questions that have to be answered, so they're a little bit more complex. They have more rigor and monitoring. So these data that are collected are monitored and are intended to be reliable and valid to answer those research questions. We are collecting patient-reported outcomes, function, survival, and clinical digital biomarkers, like I mentioned, for potential efficacy analyses or supportive data to support efficacy analyses from other studies using that same compound. And the last is that these EAPs, much like a clinical trial, have clinical monitoring, data safety monitoring boards, that's what DSMB is, and steering committees and safety reporting. That's very, very similar to traditional clinical trials. So they're a little bit more complex in structure, have multiple layers, and really are intended to be scientifically rigorous. You can go to the next slide. The other aspect of this is that I want people to understand that it is building a landscape for our future. So expanded access is not like a formal clinical trial that's placebo-controlled, and that rigor is different than something that comes out of expanded access. But we're trying to leverage these things to help support efficacy analyses for investigational products, but also build infrastructure. So the CLEAN EAP is the one that is really attempting a fully remote, decentralized enrollment. And really, as the landscape builds for clinical trials and clinical research in our academic centers and clinics across the country, maybe even theoretically thinking about the future of unburdening those clinics and having it fully decentralized may be the wave of the future to increase the capacity for EAPs to run in parallel to our basic science research and clinical trials. Pridopidine really has been fantastic in launching smaller centers and clinics that haven't had a chance to participate. So we're increasing the number of places that can participate in ALS clinical trials for the future. And RAPA, that expanded access, is really kind of developing this expertise in cell therapy in ALS. Not a lot of centers have been able to do it to date, but this expanded access program is actually building out that expertise and creating this interdisciplinary relationship between hematology, oncology, and neurology to kind of develop this kind of expertise more broadly in the United States. But really, end of the day, learnings from these EAPs will help provide efficiencies in the future and be leveraged to increase efficiency for EAPs funded in the future. So I think that's a very important point. And the last is that, we've heard in many meetings, we've heard from many people living with ALS that big data, big repositories are important, and they're tough to sustain. But all of the EAPs and NIH-funded research now use a centralized repository through the NIH. And this is a really key component because it synergizes all of these projects into one central repositories that we can kind of do future research and it's totally open and accessible for researchers, even outside of the ALS field. So I think this is a big deal for our community, and I think a moment in time where these expanded access programs that are funded through the NIH are providing a catalytic moment, a shift in our field that can help launch our landscape to be more robust in the future for expanded access for basic science and clinical trials. You can go to the next slide. And I'll pass it on to the next.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Andrews. I mean, I think we're all passionate about building infrastructure, making research available at more sites, and also really supporting research. And these EAPs are doing that. They're doing something. We now have a network of EAPs that simply didn't exist even a couple of years ago. So that's wonderful. And now, obviously, people on the line may wonder, how do I know if my center is participating, or how do I find a center that's participating? So I would say that please always ask your ALS physician or clinical care team. If they do not know, please have them connect with me or Dr. Andrews or others in the community. In particular, the NILS Consortium is a consortium of sites that's very familiar with this. And so we have resources on the NILS website, as you can see here on the slide, in terms of, what expanded access means. And so your physician, even if your physician is not familiar, they can definitely contact us. We're definitely available to talk to them about EAPs. Now, the clinical trials website is not the most user-friendly website, but I will say it was actually improved a few months ago, and specifically now lists EAPs, which were not listed before. So it's not perfect, but it's a good starting point. I do want to put in a plug for the ALS TDI Navigator tool because it's very user-friendly and includes both trials and also EAPs, and it can be tailored to your characteristic, your preferences, depending again on what you're looking for and where you are in the disease. It can be tailored to you, so you don't have to kind of search through sort of hundreds and hundreds of web pages, but it really brings the information to you. So those are resources that are available to everyone. I would encourage you to share them with other people who may be interested. And last but not least, if we can go to the next slide, we have here Catherine and Alison. We're so happy that they're available as a central resource for people living with ALS. And we do host webinars twice per month. We have a newsletter called the ALS Link. Using the QR code here, you can easily sign up, and you can register for our webinars, which we have twice a month. You can always call Catherine and Alison. And in terms of the next few webinars, we have a platform trial update next week, and then we will regroup in January. And again, the second week of every month it's always about EAPs. So our next update will be January 9th on EAPs. So with that, I think we can keep the slide on for a few seconds to make sure that people can get the information, and then maybe we can stop sharing the slide and ask a few questions. And thank you, Dr. Andrews, for joining at the right time so I can ask you a few questions. Couple of things I see in the chat, people have questions about specific sites. So in Texas, we have 2 sites in Dallas, UT Southwestern and Texas Neurology for the Pridopidine EAP. And again, you can always find the information on the NILS website, on the ALS CDI Navigator, or clinicaltrials.gov. And then another technical question: when is the deadline to apply for the new round of funds, of EAP grants? That's at the end of January, and then typically January 2025. And typically the announcement is done in September. And so the funds begin sort of end of September, early October for the new cycle. I don't know if that's exactly the timeline this year, but typically it's been like that. Dr. Andrews, there's first of all a nice comment about you. Thank you for testifying before Congress about EAPs, and thank you also for the comment about the publications. We're committed to continuing to publish. In fact, we are in the final review stages of the manuscript describing the Trialos EAP, which was the first that was funded via this mechanism. So hopefully it will be published soon. Few questions. Actually, Dr. Andrews, is this biomarker data being shared with other initiatives such as All ALS, Target ALS? We hear about a lot of these collaborative networks.
I think that's a great question, and I'm so happy to finally answer it because I think that's been a struggle in our community for a very long time. But what's really important to know is that the expanded access protocols will all collect biomarker and serum samples actually for future research. So we might not know about a biomarker today, but may know about it years to come. And the repository will hold those samples and we will be able to do research on those. So they're all being centralized and synergized under the NIH repository. The All ALS Consortium is also born out of ACT for ALS funding. And so if there was no EAP or if there's extra funds available from that year's EAP, that's how All ALS kind of came to be. And also that longitudinal serum sample collection will also be entered into that NIH same central repository. Last, All ALS has been created with the intention of leveraging existing efforts, one of which is Target ALS. And so that has bridged or kind of collaborated together to create this All ALS Consortium. So the protocols kind of been harmonized. That's it. I say it seems easy. That was like backbreaking work to kind of force fit all of these kind of projects together. But each projects have their own goals, but underneath, and what's not so apparent, I think, always to people, is that all of these projects do actually kind of connect in a way where it'll feed into a centralized repository that'll be managed by the NIH and really be open for future research. So yes, biomarkers and anything like serum samples will be all synergized into one cohesive effort going forward.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And I really want to emphasize the transformative aspect of this law that has finally allowed us to build this network that can actually harmonize and bring together different initiatives. And again, really, as you said, the importance of having a central portal, a central repository. We're going to be able to do large-scale research that simply would have never been possible before. And all this work on this first EAPs is building that infrastructure. So actually, I'll ask maybe Catherine or Alison. So let's say that somebody speaks with a clinic team and they have interest in an EAP. So what's the process of getting into an EAP?
It's a great question. I think it's why we developed 4 or 5 web pages, because it's not always a straight shoot. I think it depends a lot. You know, my first question, I think sometimes people might hear EAPs before they hear about clinical trials now, which is cool because it didn't used to be part of the conversation just a few years ago. So sometimes people hear about EAPs first before they hear about clinical trials. And so my first line is always, you know, clarifying which path is the right track. And so if somebody qualifies for a clinical trial, steering them toward those options versus steering them toward EAPs. But it really does come down to the clinical care team's guidance because they know someone's clinical history and can inform them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so important. In fact, I remember a wonderful person living with ALS and great advocate, Sandy Morris, used to mention the analogy of the seats on the bus, right? So you have seats on the bus for people living with ALS, and some are in the EAP kind of car, and others are in the clinical trial car, right? And so it has to be appropriate, and the two different pathways that are completely different. And so the place to start, I think, is the discussion with your clinical team. But again, we hear it that at times people receive care at places that are not connected to the research. So I want to emphasize that any physician can reach out to me, to Dr. Andrews, to the NILS group. We are available to provide information to anyone. So can you, maybe Dr. Andrews, can you explain how kind of, the funding goes for these grants? Is there funding for the actual production of the drug for the drug manufacturers? How is that determined?
So I will say that the funding mechanism is unique through the National Institute of Health and through the NINDS. It is primarily to allow access to the drug and to answer specific research questions for the cohort that is being included for access to the drug. But part of the grant funding does allow for drug manufacturing. The funding is actually for eligible entities that are considered small business. And as many of you know out there, a lot of the folks that are manufacturing drugs and testing drugs in early phase or mid-phase clinical development are small companies. They are not your giant pharma companies that are in the ALS space. They usually step in or want to partner later when we see some results or they would like to kind of confirm on a pivotal trial. So typically, companies will focus on doing the clinical trial. And at best, if they have the funds to do so, they usually provide what's called an open label extension, which is an extension of the main study for those that were in the clinical trials. So anyone outside of the clinical trial or not eligible for the clinical trial gets no access. But if it's a small company and it fits the category of small business entity, usually there's limited resources to allow for expanded access or compassionate use of their investigational product. And this is where this funding mechanism comes into play. So there is an intent to make sure clinical development continues to meet efficacy definitions by the FDA, but we also want to be able to include individuals that can't participate in a clinical trial because of eligibility restrictions and allow parallel access to the drug so that we can understand safety and tolerability in a broader population and also kind of provide supportive evidence for the primary clinical trial. So the funding mechanism is a little unusual in that way, but it is very important. Otherwise, I don't think that expanded access we would have that ability to do that today.
Yeah. That's a good question about the type of research that's collected. So, for example, are EAPs collecting exposome or epigenetic data? Well, I would say that we are collecting the samples that can enable those research questions. So, again, to the point that was made earlier, what's important is that now all of these efforts are harmonized, connected, thanks to the NIH and on all these initiatives that are essentially all providing the same data or samples to the same central biorepository or portal. And so let's say that tomorrow somebody wants to study a specific aspect of epigenetic data or exposome, as you were asking, they can leverage samples and data that's actually coming from more than one project, giving them a different type of power, an order of magnitude that simply was not possible before, because rather than just using, for example, the samples from one small project, now because of the NIH collects all these samples, puts them in the same place, and then uses the principles of open science. So all those samples have to be released to people who have, they can be released to people who have scientific research questions to be answered. Again, somebody can answer those questions much better, actually, with much more power. So I know we're taking most of these questions. I think I'll try to take the last few. Actually, there's a good question. Dr. Andrews, what do you think about sort of cocktail treatment? I mean, there is a good comment here. Thank you for sending your thoughts. Somebody's living with ALS and they want to know cocktails of medications. Maybe it's not a single drug. that will, conquer the disease. Maybe it's a combination of riluzole, Radicava, a few EAPs, some supplements. How can we study all these cocktails of different things that could be complementary?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Very, very forward thinker, whoever asked that question. So what I will say, number one is when you're right now, the situation is that anyone who gets diagnosed with ALS, I'll always kind of talk about how you should run through and talk about the pros and cons about the approved therapies in your region first. Then the next step is thinking about experimental therapy. And if you are eligible for clinical trials, that would be the next step. If you're not eligible for clinical trials or not one available to you, then expanded access. So that's kind of the algorithm. And I don't want to underemphasize two major components that gets overlooked in multidisciplinary care. One is respiratory care. Second is nutritional care. They probably have a big effect that people underestimate in terms of disease modification or disease progression. And so together, I think all of that can empower somebody. Now, it's true especially for sporadic forms of ALS, we don't exactly know the order of events that occur and the exact targets per se. We know some, so it's not that we don't know anything. We know some, and that's why we were able to do clinical trials. But combination therapy, and it's likely that we'll have to use different therapies or different products or investigation products to target different mechanisms that are identified as not behaving normally in the motor neuron. And that might optimize the treatment effect. Combination therapy is tough to study in a formal clinical trial setting because if you have one or two drugs together, you have to study the drugs together according to FDA. Then you have to study one and then the other. So it's a much more complicated path for getting FDA approval in combination settings. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, though. And so I think there are efforts underway thinking about ways to efficiently study combination therapy, especially at a moment in time where in sporadic ALS, where we don't know everything exactly about each and every individual with sporadic ALS. So often I'll have people that'll come in, talk about riluzole, talk about edaravone or Radicava. And, riluzole targets excitotoxicity due to excess glutamate. Edaravone is oxidative stress. And then someone will say, maybe I should take a supplement that targets mitochondrial dysfunction. Maybe there'll be something that targets nerve inflammation. So in this day where there isn't a clinical trial with a combination therapy yet, I think that's one way in practice to approach combination therapy. But in the future, testing these things in combination for complementary mechanisms may be the wave and the vision for the future until we know exactly what causes ALS.
Yes, and in the last minute here, I'm very happy that somebody mentioned and asked about PLS or primary lateral sclerosis, actually very timely. Dr. Andrews and I attended the third International PLS conference last week in Montreal. We helped organize it with Dr. Mitsumoto from Columbia, and I'm really happy to share that we had a great day of intense conversations. Our postdoctoral fellows are busy at work writing up the results, and so they will be published open access for everyone to see in the new year, hopefully very soon. And also, we collected all the speakers' slides, and we are making a video. I really need to acknowledge our postdoctoral fellow who could work some technological magic here, and basically we will be able to upload the slides with the presentation on the website of both the Spastic Paraplegia Foundation and the MND Association, again, early in 2025. They're literally going through the slides and making technical adjustments. So as soon as those are available, you'll be able to hear all the latest news on PLS research. There's definitely a lot going on in PLS. So we're very, very excited about that meeting and about the possibility of sharing. Now we have technology, it's possible, to share the recordings and the papers and all of that rather quickly. So we'll do that very soon. Great. Before we end, Dr. Andrews, any final word?
Nope. I think this is, huge steps. I really have to acknowledge the people and living with ALS and their families that have really motivated the research community to really develop and really create this expanded access profile and portfolio, and hopefully that grows in the future to complement our clinical trial efforts and our basic science efforts, and they synergize with each other. So this is just the beginning.
Absolutely. So please come back next month. Again, for the last year or so, we have had this monthly EAP series. We do want to keep everyone posted in real time so that you know exactly what studies are available, whether they're completed in terms of enrollment or there's more spots. So thank you so much, and we'll see everyone in the new year. Thank you.
Happy holidays.